Imagine walking into your job every day and the second you see them, your stomach drops. You know you have to interact with this person, but you don't have a choice. It's part of your job. But every interaction leaves you torn, feeling awful and incredible all at the same time. You want those interactions, you crave them, but they only leave you more obsessed in emotional agony and stuck in perpetual longing for this person. Even passing them in the hallway makes your chest tighten. Maybe you're sitting through a meeting trying to focus, but all you can think about is them. And you tell yourself, this is ridiculous. This is my job. I should be able to function here. But your obsessive limerent brain will not be tamed. That's what being limerent over someone you work with feels like. And it's one of the most common struggles I get questions about. So today we're going to tackle some of those questions together. Questions like, do I need to change jobs? Is it impossible to have any kind of contact with the limerent object? And how am I supposed to stop obsessing over them if I have to see them every single day? Is this even possible? If you've wondered about these things, you're not the only one, because this is one of the most common limerence scenarios available. By the end of this video, I hope you have a better sense of what you can actually do about it in your work life and how to move forward. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. Around here, we spend a lot of time talking about how we reclaim our lives back from the grips of childhood trauma, from emotional dysregulation, and from anxiety. And we do this ongoing exercise because we want to live our lives on our own terms. I hope you stick around. Before we get into it, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any future videos. And if you're finding this content helpful, please give it a like. It really helps the channel grow. But before we get into the 3 questions, consider one really important thing. Who are you really? Your baseline personality does matter. The addiction is an addiction, but who you are at your core makes a difference. By baseline, I mean your default tendencies, the way you naturally move towards either independence or connection, towards structure or towards spontaneity, your ability to handle being limerent for a coworker or for someone that you have to be in close contact with will at least partly depend on these baseline tendencies. Let me give you 2 simple scenarios to illustrate what I mean with all of this. Let's say in one scenario we have Betty. Betty is fiercely independent. She's highly autonomous, and one of her core needs is to be self-directed. Betty absolutely hates the feeling of being controlled or of being dependent on someone else. While she's highly limerent for John, with whom she works, because independence is such a strong value for her, that value becomes kind of a brake for her. So even while Betty is being pulled toward John and toward interacting with him, her need for autonomy helps her to limit her own contact with him. That means less tendency to run into him in the hallway, no extra messages, no accidental lunches with him. It doesn't mean that Betty is less limerent, it just means that her own wiring gives her some degree of leverage to control her own access to the limerent object. In the second scenario, we have John. John is warm, cooperative, and quite social. Reassurance and shared experience means a lot to John. A lot more than it does to Betty. He's not driven by independence the way Betty is. He refuels through contact with other people. John's baseline makes setting boundaries in limerence a little bit harder for him. His own instincts will nudge him towards more contact with the limerent object, maybe checking in with them a little bit extra, maybe lingering around and making small talk, or looking for signals from the limerent object, because connection is how John naturally soothes. Neither of these people is more or less limerent, but how you handle being limerent will partly depend on who you are at your core. If you're highly independent, like Betty, you may be able to sort of white knuckle distance and to some extent avoid processing your feelings a little bit in order to create some space. If you're a connection-seeking type of person like John, you may end up overexposing yourself to more contact with the other person. Knowing who you are as the baseline will help you determine how you can handle being in close proximity to a person you're limerent over. So your strategy has to fit you and who you are. That's what I mean, that you have to ask yourself some questions and get to know yourself a little bit so that you know how to move forward in this scenario. That being said, let's start with the biggest question of all. Do you actually need to change jobs if you're limerent over a coworker? Is it that bad? This is probably the first and most popular question I get, and the one most of us ask when limerence shows up at work. Do I need to leave my job? And the honest answer is sometimes yes, but not always. Sometimes, yes, changing jobs will be the only way forward. But other times there are things we can try before making this kind of potentially life-altering decision, especially if this job is a career that we've worked hard to get to. These are not lighthearted, spur-of-the-moment choices. Here's why the decision feels so urgent. In the workplace, avoidance usually is not an option. If you're, let's say, on the second floor and the LO is tucked away on the sixth floor somewhere out of reach, maybe you can avoid them most of the time. But often, if you're really asking yourself this question, it's because you can't avoid them. You have to interact sometimes daily, sometimes in long meetings, sometimes with other team members, other coworkers, sometimes in those casual hallway encounters that catch you off guard because you're in the same space all the time. And every one of those moments becomes fuel for the fire of limerence that you're already living with. That's why so many of us wonder, am I going to have to torch my career just to get out of the situation? And it's a fair question because limerence is not some lighthearted crush once it passes the first phase. When it tips into obsessive focus and your brain won't turn off, it stops being fun. It becomes exhausting. And at work, the combination of anticipating contact with this person and at the same time constantly fearing rejection can make your entire work environment feel unbearable. So before you do something drastic, ask yourself a few things. How intense is the obsession? No judgment. Sometimes it's milder, especially if there's a physical or emotional distance. Other times it's so overwhelming that there's no space in your brain for anything else. Especially if this person is part of a close team of people you're working with all the time. Ask yourself, can you still function at work, or are you barely able to focus on your daily tasks every day? What's the structure of your job? Are you side by side constantly, or is there some room to create some sort of physical distance? Could you move to a different department? Could you move to a different area or adjust your schedule so that you're not overlapping with this person? Sometimes restructuring in this way is possible, and that can be a sort of middle ground. Also ask yourself, what's at stake? Would leaving actually solve the problem, or would it create a whole new set of challenges? So that instead of being limerent, now you're dealing with financial insecurity or you're tanking your career altogether. Because remember, quitting your job doesn't magically cure limerence. It does create an opportunity for mental space by creating physical distance. Without those fresh daily interactions, you may finally be able to use techniques to get your thoughts under your control. It's hard for any behavioral technique to work if you're in daily physical contact with this person. Then ask yourself, what's happening in your primary relationship? If you are in a relationship, if you're married or in a long-term relationship, is this obsession at work putting that primary relationship at risk? I mean, if your spouse or your partner is saying this can't go on, you need to quit your job, that's a major factor and one that you'll probably have to consider and consider heavily. So for some of us, yes, a clean break will be the only way forward, but for others, there can be some middle ground. You can attempt to set fantasy boundaries for yourself. You can start to use behavioral modification techniques to try to get your thoughts under your control. And you may be able to restructure your day to limit unnecessary contact with this person. And only if none of that works, then perhaps, yes, you can consider changing jobs. So the real answer is that you don't always have to change jobs, but you do have to make some kinds of changes, either in how you structure your workday, or if that fails, in where you work altogether. Let's tackle the second question that goes hand in hand with the first. Is it impossible to have any kind of contact with an LO? One of the hardest parts about workplace limerence is that complete avoidance is, by and large, unrealistic. In most situations, we have to have some kind of contact, and that makes us wonder, is it even possible to handle contact at all without staying stuck in the obsession and repetitive, compulsive thoughts of limerence? And the answer is yes and no. Very limited contact is possible. What's really problematic is unstructured contact. Here's what I mean. If you're just letting every interaction happen on autopilot, you're chatting to this person in the hallway, you're lingering at their desk, you're using work as an excuse to talk to them, then your brain is going to keep rewarding itself with those little hits of dopamine. And that's more than enough to keep the obsession alive and thriving. But if you keep contact very structured, meaning brief and professional, it could be manageable. Only you know yourself. The difference is in the boundaries that you set for yourself. If the only conversations you have with this person are necessary for the job, and you train yourself not to add extra layers, then yes, it is possible to survive contact without constantly fueling the fire. But again, that depends on how debilitated you feel by your constant thoughts and ruminations at this point. If it's a non-stop conversation that you're having in your head with this person, then even professional, only necessary contact is going to be a problem. You can try to keep it minimal, but if you find that every interaction sparks a week and a half of fresh fantasy running in the back of your mind at all times, then it's probably not going to work out. Think of it this way. It's like being on a strict diet, but keeping candy in the house. If it's sitting there open, tempting you, of course you're going to grab some. But if it's sealed away and you've set rules for when and how you interact with it, if it's still there, at least it doesn't control you as much. But be realistic. Are you the kind of person who can have some candy in the cupboard and only eat it on Tuesdays after dinner? Or are you the kind of person who's going to be too tempted to keep themselves back? If you know that you're this kind of regimented, self-controlled person, then perhaps you can handle it. And no judgment if you're not. A lot of us are not. Just be realistic with who you are. So, no, you don't have to treat this person like they're radioactive and avoid all human interaction. But you do have to structure your contact so that it doesn't feed into the obsession. Meaning work contact only, no outside of work contact at all, no late night brainstorming sessions with this person, no just dropping by. That's the only way that this situation could, I say that clearly, could be possible. Lastly, let's tackle the third question in this video, which I think is actually at the heart of this issue of workplace limerence for so many of us. How can we possibly stop obsessing when we have to see this person every single day? And the first thing to understand is that our brain gets rewarded every time we see this person. In fact, every time we think about them. If you're struggling with this daily, please know that there is nothing actually wrong with you. So many of you have sent me messages telling me that there's something wrong with you because you can't stop thinking about your LO. There is nothing, in fact, wrong with you. Your brain is responding exactly the way it's wired to respond to this kind of situation. That's why it feels so hard, almost impossible, because every encounter, whether it's just passing them in the hallway or it's sitting in the same meeting together or glancing across the room of a shared workspace and seeing them working away on the other side of the room, it gives us another little dopamine hit. And that hit keeps the cycle alive. So we know that trying to fix this with willpower alone is very difficult, if not impossible, for many of us, meaning we need real strategies. One of the most effective is what I call fantasy boundaries. That means deciding ahead of time when and where you're going to let yourself think about this person. For example, maybe you give yourself 20 minutes at the end of the day to let your mind sort of wander around, because it's going to want to anyway. You might as well set up a schedule. But outside of that, when you catch yourself wondering, where's Mary? Is she up on the 6th floor? You stop and you remind yourself, nope, that's for later. I now have my 20 minutes. This is not the time. And you redirect yourself, because telling yourself, I'm never going to think about Mary again, is probably not realistic at first. So instead, we sort of ease ourselves towards that goal by starting with structure. But this task of setting fantasy boundaries, it sounds easier than it actually is. It takes real discipline. And this is why you really have to think about what you're getting out of this, what you're getting out of stopping yourself. Wanting to really keep your job has to be at the forefront of your priorities, because that will fuel you to be disciplined, right? If you cannot do this, or you know yourself to not be a person who can do this, be realistic. Another strategy is deliberately filling the mental space that this person occupies. If what you're getting out of these interactions feels like excitement, then find challenges that push you physically or mentally. If what you're craving from this person is validation most of all, bring that into your life through friendships or social spaces where you feel seen and validated. If they feel like a source of fresh possibility in life, set tangible goals for yourself that remind you that your future is wide open, not tied to this one person. It also helps to restructure your workday wherever you can. Change your environment if possible. Limit casual, unplanned interactions to the bare minimum. Create routines that put you back in charge of your time instead of waiting for those random dopamine hits that you're getting from this person. And remember, doing all of this is a process. You're not going to snap your fingers and stop thinking about them altogether tomorrow. If that were possible, we wouldn't need to make so many limerence videos. Which reminds me, go and take a look at the playlist. The rest of the videos might help you. The real goal here is to give yourself enough space and structure that this person's presence doesn't completely dominate your inner world. I know that's easier said than done, but it's how we start to sort of loosen the grip, even if you keep your job and you have to see them every single day. So those are the big 3 questions so many of us are wrestling with when limerence shows up at work. Do I need to change jobs? Is any kind of contact even possible? And how can I stop my obsessive thoughts if I have to see this person every day? The truth is, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It really depends on you, how well you know yourself, how much control you have over your interactions with this person, how much control you have over your own actions. For some of you, a clean break really will be the only way forward. That's the realistic answer. For others, it's more about restructuring your work environment and adjusting your schedule and setting really hard boundaries. If you've watched my other videos on limerence, you'll know that the limerent object is usually a mirror, a piece of valuable information we can use to redirect our attention. And the attention usually has to come back to ourselves. So try to remember, you don't necessarily have to blow up your career or your life to get past limerence. With real diligence, you can try to take the energy of limerence and let it sort of guide you towards building those same things, excitement, validation, possibility, in healthier and more sustainable ways. And only if that proves to be unworkable, it doesn't work for you, then perhaps really consider changing jobs, because it's a big decision. If you have more questions about limerence, or you want to learn more about what it is, how it affects us, how to get past it, check out the Limerence playlist. I always link it below. I talk about everything in there, from why we get stuck on certain people to how we break free of the fantasy of limerence, and why validation feels so, so, so addictive. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider liking and subscribing so we can keep going together. It really helps my channel grow, and it means we get to keep working on this together. Until next time.